My session, Deploy to Mars, Part 2, Orbital Maneuvers. So in the previous session, we talked about ground control systems, which are all the things you do locally with Lando. And some various tools that kind of pair well with Lando and get you some cool things that you can do with your site. Now we're going to talk about orbital maneuvers, which are what I'm referring to as the things you're doing in the cloud or your CI environment, or somewhere that's not your own desktop. Although we will do some things there, the bulk of the work goes somewhere. Deep space, Mars even. There'll be servers there eventually, right? All right, so I'm going to... There we go. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is the HYPERDRIVE script function that comes with Lando, or is available for Lando, that most people aren't aware of. And the purpose of HYPERDRIVE is to get Lando up and running in an automated fashion in a CI environment in the cloud. So the idea is you set up Lando in the last session. If you were there, you saw, and you may know this, with Lando, you can set up a lot of the environment stuff and then set up tooling that you're going to use. Maybe you can have some Lando tooling that runs a bunch of your tests, runs your test suite. And you already have this set up. It works in Lando in your environment, but now maybe you want to have a testing process that goes down your build pipeline so that maybe you can't deploy a site that doesn't pass tests, right? So, okay, you can do this locally. I type Lando test. It runs my test suite. I see that it fails. But maybe somebody forgets to run the test suite and they push up their changes. You can, with HYPERDRIVE and whichever CI tool you're using, automate that. You'll start your Lando environment. You'll use your test suite that you've already configured in Lando, and it'll run there. And if it fails, it'll fail your CI run and prevent the build from deploying or whatever you have going on in that CI pipeline. And that can be things, like I said, running tests. That can be if you want Lando to run build artifacts, which are basically the end result. You run your composer, you get all of your dependencies. Maybe you want that committed and ready to deploy, and maybe you have some Lando tooling that does that. You can actually add a cloud process that'll do that for you on every pull request. Spin up Lando, build out your dependencies, commit those changes to a GitHub repository, and go from there. So we'll cover some of that. All right, in the previous previous session, I talked about some of the tooling you could do that is kind of universal, useful in your Lando setups. The DL tooling, so this is one that I set up. This one I have set up specifically for platform.sh, but you can kind of mix and match whatever commands you need to. Essentially, what this does is it remotes into wherever your site is hosted, does a database dump, and downloads it. Various hosting companies give you some tools to do this. You just kind of swap them out, do what you need there to get that working. Or even if it's SSHing, you could add SSH commands here that'll SSH into your server, and then rsync your database down to your local. But if you have that command, that makes it easy to get the remote database into your local. And then here's an example of a test tooling. So you would type Lando test. It would run against your Drupal site. In this case, we're running some PHP unit tests. And Lando test kicks it off. It runs it. Another useful one, Lando DB reset. This is one I like to put into most of my projects. It tells the database. So in the DBDL tooling we created, the SQL file gets downloaded. Now this will import it. So you type DB reset, it gets imported into your local Lando environment. And then it runs the usual kind of steps you'd want to do with a fresh database, the updb, it runs the database updates in Drupal, it clears the caches, it does a config import if you're doing config management. And then the last step, I always like to have it show me the user login link, but probably not necessary in the CI side of things. So actually, I'm going to go out of this and actually show you some configuration. Okay, so if I do presentation mode, there we go, nice and big. Okay, so for my example, I am using GitHub Actions for my CI tooling. You've got Circle CI, Travis CI, GitLab. There's a bunch of different tools that will let you kind of set up your own environment to run tests and perform actions against your code base. But yeah, this case I'm using GitHub Actions, and basically what we've configured here is I've named this. This is a config YAML file that lives in your repository, where you basically define what the GitHub action is, the CI function, what it's going to do, how it works. And this is actually one I'm using, so I'm just going to kind of walk through it and tell you how it's set up and what it does. So, and actually, can I see the chat in case anyone, and feel free to ask any questions. The last one was more, presentation style. This one I'm kind of just talking about stuff. So if anyone wants to chime in and ask a question, please feel free to do so. So what we have here, okay, we're telling GitHub, and I should mention too that all these other services, most of them use YAML as far as I'm aware. I haven't used all of them. And they're all pretty easy to set up, and they all pretty much work similarly to this. You set up what you want it to do, and it does it. And actually, most of what we're doing is just getting Lando working, and then running everything that we've already set up in Lando. So it saves you a lot of steps. You don't have to set up, all of these testing things in a new environment. You've already got Lando. It's right here. So here's how we do it. So we've got a job. It's called Tests in Lando. And what it's going to do is run on an instance of Ubuntu. So GitHub is going to, for us, spin up an Ubuntu instance. And then in our environment variables, we're putting in the xterm there because I want to see terminal output from Lando, and that helps with that. In this case, I'm interfacing with platform.sh. This project, use that. You can use others, but we need that project ID so that the HYPERDRIVE and Lando know where to get my database from. So in our steps here, we're telling, okay, we named this one install HYPERDRIVE. So what this does, it just goes and let's see, scroll here. Okay. So what we're doing, we're telling apt-get to update, telling it to install cgroup bin and curl. Those are going to be required for us to download and run what we need. So now we're going to use curl. Curl just downloads files. And we're telling it, okay, download Lando HYPERDRIVE. And this is release version 054. Not sure if that's the latest, but you put whatever the latest is there. And then where you want to download it to. We're putting it in the bin. That means it becomes an executable, basically. So yeah, right from the Lando GitHub page, there's this HYPERDRIVE, Lando/HYPERDRIVE. That's where you can get it from. And now once we have it locally, we need to make it executable. So we do that. And then we've got this checkout branch action. And this is actually built into GitHub Actions. They actually have like these preset configurations for doing particular tasks. This one in particular is checkout. And what it does is whatever your branch currently is, it just checks it out. So you don't even need to do anything with Git. It just does it for you. So we've checked out the master of our current repository, and we're going into prepare the testing environment. So we have all of our code. We have HYPERDRIVE downloaded, and now we're going to start doing things. First things first, we go through and we set up a cache directory for Lando. We set up a file for it to dump error reports. And then we need to, well, part of this script installs Docker, which is a dependency of Lando. And to do that, you need to set up the repositories, and the key server here essentially sets it up so you can access the repository. So we got a few steps. So Ubuntu out of the box isn't ready to just install Lando. So we got a couple steps to go through. But then we set up HYPERDRIVE. We have this HYPERDRIVE file that we downloaded into our bin directory. So now that's just a command that's available to us. We can just type HYPERDRIVE in the command line. So that's what we're doing here basically in this script. HYPERDRIVE, part of the setup options, because it does use Git, you'll need Git to be configured. So these are the same settings you might set up the first time you set up Git on your machine. You might tell that your name and your email address. And then what that does is it just kicks off the HYPERDRIVE script, and all that's doing is, like I mentioned, installing Docker, getting it configured in the way that is best to run Lando, and goes from there. Now, once Lando and Docker are installed and configured, it will move on here, and this is now specific to my project. I have platform.sh. I've got a token set up on my platform.sh account so that I, from the GitHub Actions system here, can access my data in my hosting environment. So I've got that token set up as an environment variable, so it doesn't need to be visible here in my code. And I just pull that in to this environment. And now, well, we're just running a normal Lando environment now. Lando start. I want it verbose just because it's running in CI, and I want to be able to see if there's any errors. I want to see everything it's doing. So Lando start, it starts up. It pumps out a bunch of information about what it's doing as it gets there. And then once Lando is up and running, I've run into some issues where you don't want to do stuff too fast. You want to wait like 10 seconds after it starts, or else sometimes maybe Drupal isn't available yet, even though it should be. But either way, I had to sleep in here 10 seconds after Lando finishes starting up. By that point, everything is ready and accessible. So now platform.sh, we're in Lando, where I have set up the platform.sh CLI tool that allows me to interface from my Lando to my hosting on platform. And again, like Pantheon has this sort of thing. I'm sure most of the others have these sorts of CLI tools, at least the big ones, that let you do these sort of things. So this isn't specifically unique to platform. There'd be similar types of ways of doing this for other hosting providers. But platform, in this particular instance, gives us the ability to authenticate. So Lando on the GitHub side is authenticating with platform's servers, and it's going to use that token that I defined up above here to essentially log me in. And so now any platform.sh command I run, it should have access. So So one of the things, we need to get SSH access into for our GitHub Actions Lando environment to access platform.sh. That's how they have it set up. If you want to be able to get in, you got to have an SSH key in platform's system. Most of the others work very similarly. But they give us a tool here. I can say add an SSH key. It will generate one, send it over to platform so that now my machine here can log into platform and perform any like rsyncs and stuff like that without any additional login. But once you send that key over to platform, there tends to be a minute before it actually works. So we sleep for 200 seconds to let platform finish setting up that key before we try to actually do anything. So now we're going to say, okay, dump our database, use master DB if merging into master branch, otherwise use develop DB. So in my repository, master is the primary branch that is used on production. And then develop is the branch that we do all of our merging into. So this essentially is kind of our test QA environment as we merge things in, and then we can merge to master, which deploys it to our production. The target branch, so we're just asking GitHub, hey GitHub, what branch is this? So it'll either return master or develop. And then we want to, here we're saying we're going to export by default. We're going to export the develop. We're telling, so on the platform.sh side, the Git branches and the actual environments on platform are the same names. So master on platform is our production environment. Its machine name is master. And then our kind of QA environment, its machine name is develop. So we're saying, okay, use the Git branch, assume develop, but check to see if our target branch is master. If it is, then our DB, we're going to want the master DB. So basically, whenever I do, whenever this runs, this is set up to run whenever there is a pull request. If I'm making my GitHub pull request, and the target is my develop branch, then it'll pull the develop database and use that because to test to make sure my branch will merge into develop just fine using the data that's there. And then same with master, when you're going to deploy to production, I do that as a pull request as well. So deploy to production, I pull request, make the target the master branch, then it will know that I'm doing that. And it will pull in the production database and work with that. So get some water here. Matt in the chat is asking about pulling in, SSHing in and such with a, it's like a plain Linux environment if you don't have one of the big providers here that kind of gives you these CLI tools. I don't have an example that's up, but I actually have some code that I used to use on an older server, so I can actually put that up. I'll put the links here. So these are all right. So I just posted 2 links in the chat, and for those watching this recording later, there will be on a slide towards the end. The Lando examples link is what I have out there currently. Most of the stuff I'm covering here, I intend to put there. So if you want to follow that, it'll go up. I'll put some up there today, and or as I come up with them, whenever I come up with something new, I'll stick it up there. But yeah, I'll put up some more examples of this sort of thing and interacting with a more vanilla Linux environment. But I have done it rsync. You can execute SSH commands with embedded SSH commands. So I've done it to where you can have a single command that runs SSH locally on your machine to tell the remote machine to do a database dump, and then the next step in the build pulls downloads that with rsync, and yeah, it is possible. It does work. It's a couple more steps, but yeah, I'll demo that. Great. Okay, so so we set up earlier our Lando DBDL. That was the set of commands. It could be what I just mentioned. One command that SSHs into the remote server, executes a database dump, followed by another command that does an rsync to pull that file down. Or in the case that I showed, it was platform.sh CLI tool that does that. But however you do it, you set up your Lando tooling to make that work, and now it's available for you here. Now remember, this is running on GitHub servers, but you set it up to make it work well for yourself when you're setting up your own environment. Well, it's here too. So you don't have to do any extra weird steps trying to set up this GitHub environment to do the database downloading and importing, because our DBDL and then our DB reset are already here for us. We've already set them up. We already know they work. We just use them. And here they are. So now DBDL, it was downloaded. DB reset, it gets imported into the Lando database service and runs all those drush steps and such to clear the caches, do database updates, import the config from the code. So you're basically running the most updated environment. It checked earlier it checked out the current version of the code. So we've got the latest code that's in this pull request. We've got the latest database, all imported, all reconfigured, all caches flushed, ready to go. So now, what we're doing, well, one little cleanup step here. We're going to tell platform to get rid of that SSH key we just created earlier to access these things, because every time this runs, it creates a new SSH key in your platform account, and eventually, you're just going to end up with a ton of SSH keys. And we don't want to save them. It doesn't really make sense. We just create them on the fly. So clean up, delete what was there with this messy command. But I'll put that out there on my examples. So now we've set up our environment. We cleaned up our SSH keys, and now our test suite is Lando tooling. We've already set this up. We run this test, that test, the next test, all under the one Lando test command that we created. So that's all you have to do. You just run Lando test, and it runs your whole test suite right here in GitHub's cloud environment. And now I'll show you what this looks like. Let me switch to where's my Firefox? Okay, so here we have so this looks like GitHub, right? Okay. And all the CI tools that I'm familiar with, we're using GitHub's built-in, but like Travis CI, Circle CI, they all have integrations with GitHub. So these can actually do the things I'm about to show you. Those other tools can do this too. It doesn't have to be the GitHub Actions to get this. But what you get here is I've created a merge request, a pull request. I basically want my latest changes to go into our QA environment. And just by having created that, because of that file we just went through, it is going to run our Lando test thing here. So I can go to details, and it'll actually show what it had done here. So the setup hyperdrive step that we went through, it just does, it downloads all the packages it needs to get Docker and Lando installed up and running. And then it checked out the branch that I'm trying to merge in. And then now we run hyperdrive, and it runs and does all the things that we told it to do. Actually, this is the part where it's setting up Lando, and then run tests in Lando. Oh, and actually, in this instance, we had a failure before we even got to our test. So let me see here. Okay, so there's a dependency problem. So let me look at an older one, see if we can get one that works here, or that worked. So, pull request, actions. That is not what I wanted. There, details. Logs expired. I swear we'll show you something that works. Okay, well, either way, GitHub will show us logs for what it did and how it set everything up and how it went. And then it runs our test, and it would show in here all the output you would get if you ran your test locally. And if your test fails, it outputs an error code that gets picked up by GitHub or any CI tool, and it'll get passed through so that you see, like here, this Alex says that this test did not pass. We saw from the logs that it didn't pass because for some reason Lando didn't get installed. I'll have to look into why that happened. But if your actual test failed, same thing. You'd see the X here, and then you could go into your details and look at the logs and see which part failed. But what that does, say I'm an administrator, but everything's all red here. You're going to merge something that is that hasn't passed tests, right? You essentially, if I wasn't the admin, I wouldn't have the ability to merge this because the test didn't pass. So that's a great way of doing things. So, and again, if you use like Circle CI, you'd see instead of the little GitHub logo here, you might see the Circle CI logo here, and they integrate the same way. And you can do the same sorts of things where Lando gets installed in Circle CI, runs your tests the same way, then reports back to GitHub. So that is a great way to ensure that the code you're merging in isn't going to break things. And it's great because you don't have to manage a whole separate testing environment to do that. Just use the Lando one you already use. And I'm thinking, yeah, I might have the reason that failed there was probably because I'm using an older version of HYPERDRIVE, and the Docker that it is installing is not correct anymore. So I'll have to update that. Okay, so what else can we go into here? Okay. So you can also automate things that this is a much simpler version, but you can use something like this to do your build artifacts, for example. Actually, yeah, okay. So, actually, I'm going to go back to the other one. So, if you were to have Lando tooling, let's say you want to build your build artifact, your complete code. Composer doesn't need to be run anymore. You've already run it. You've already got all of your dependencies downloaded. Everything's ready to rock. One of the benefits to saving that state and deploying that is to you basically have a complete build of your site. So I don't know if I'm explaining this well enough, but anyway, typically you install somewhere like platform.sh or Pantheon or any of these others. You keep in your Git repository all the code, but none of the dependencies. Then you go deploy to the hosting environment, and all of your dependencies are there installed. It runs composer install and pulls down all your dependencies and then deploys that there. Another approach to avoid having to do that build step on the actual host is to somewhere in your CI pipeline run this build. And that allows you to have things like where if the build fails, it never makes it far enough into your build pipeline to ever get deployed. And there's reasons for doing this. One of the biggest being you git commit with all of your dependencies already installed. Everything's there. If something goes wrong at any point, you can just revert that commit, and all of your dependencies are instantly switched back to the way they were. You don't have to do a rebuild in Composer and waste time for that rollback. At least that's my biggest benefit that I see. Otherwise, okay, you got to roll it back and then commit that, and then have your build system rebuild your dependencies, and that takes time. You're just trying to roll back because you deployed something that broke your site and you need to get back up, right? If that's already there in a commit, you just back up that commit, and your code is right back where it was. So there's a benefit to building that out in your CI pipeline. You can do that with tooling. I don't have an example here, but the idea is similar to what I've done here for this Gatsby example. You are actually, there's two different places where I'm doing sort of the same thing. So our install is it just runs all of the, so it's in the tooling. So Lando install will run Composer install, pull in all those dependencies. This particular project is a decoupled. It's running Drupal and Gatsby, so it also needs to run Yarn to get Gatsby's requirements, dependencies downloaded. So once we have those in, what we would do then is fairly simple. Just say like git add say everything, and then something like well, say build artifact. Now, as long as your vendors directories, there's a little more to it than this, because typically your vendor directories would be excluded from your Git repo, so your dependencies don't end up in there. In this case, you want them to show up in there. So actually, you probably would want to manually add those. So you go like git add app Drupal vendor, and another line for the node modules and for the Yarn stuff. Those will get added into your Git. You could have a commit now that has all of those dependency files. And now in your CI build, like I showed you earlier, you would just run this install command that would do all those things, build that artifact, and then from there, GitHub gives you the tools, those actions that I mentioned, where you have let's see. Like this, where it tells you they give you this tool where it'll just check out your local. They give you a couple other options that you can add to this to say, hey, check out a different branch entirely. I don't want this in master. Use the code from master, but then use the code from master, build everything out. Then the last step would be, rather than Lando test, we say Lando install, where it downloads everything and commits that change, or commits those files that were added, and then we could then have our checkout here. This isn't going to be exact because I'm just kind of winging it here, but might check out deploy in or maybe that's it. Maybe you just have a deploy branch. So then have it check out the deploy branch, and there's another one of these that the action, rather than being checkout, is commit. And there's ones for push and such. So essentially, you could check out another branch, and everything you've just done goes into that branch, and you end up with essentially one branch that is your full site, like I mentioned, ready to go out there. Yeah, deploy dev, deploy stage. Yeah, you could have any sort of or however you want to do it, where you want it to be. But the idea is you keep all this vendor code out of your code base, except for in a specific branch, or you could even go into another Git repo that only carries the fully built out versions. But a branch typically would suffice, because then you say to your hosting provider, you set them up to use that branch as your source of truth for code, and they don't have to build any of the requirements. Everything's already built. They just pull it and you're ready to go. Like I said, rolling back is great because you just undo that commit, revert it, and all of your code is back where it is. No need for another build process. Great way to roll things back in an emergency. Okay. So another fun thing you can do if you want to control everything from within Lando. So currently with all of this stuff, when I want to kick off all of these, I have to pull up GitHub and go in through their system, and I can actually show you. So I would have to go to a pull request, and then I'd have to find, actually I'd have to open my branch, or here we go, new pull request will work. I got to go here. I got to put a new pull request. I want to say, okay, this is the branch that I want merged in. And then when I actually hit create pull request, that's what will trigger all the CI stuff that'll run the build, run the test, or start building our build artifact if that's what we've got in there. So you're leaving your control console here. Extra steps, you don't want to do that. So there's a fancy new tool that GitHub provides if you're using GitHub. I'm not sure about the other Git providers, what they're doing, but GitHub has this. So we're going to show you this. I lost it. Where'd it go? I think it is in Firefox, actually. Yeah, GitHub CLI. So with Lando, you can actually, we'll start there actually. So on GitHub, the repo CLI/CLI is the GitHub CLI. And in here we can get our download links. I believe we want a Debian. Let's just assume that's right. I may be wrong, but copy link location. So we get the link for the latest version here. And then we go to our, this is our Lando YAML file, our Lando config file. And we can, in a build step, so services app server build. Here I'm downloading the platform.sh CLI, but let's just, I'm just going to give you a rough idea of how this might work, but you essentially put your download there. Well, that's, yeah, well, sure. It's a deb file. So, all right, well, I'm not going to get into exactly how, but the idea is through tooling, you can, or through your build steps, jumping around here, sorry about that. So in your build steps, you do something similarly where you download the latest CLI. That is actually an installer file, so you'd actually have to, well, you'd chmod that file that you just downloaded, and then you'd need one more line in here that actually installs that. Not as much of a Linux guru, so I'm not going to pretend to remember what command I need to type to actually install a .deb file, but that would go right here. And then you would have now the command gh, which is the GitHub CLI, available inside your Lando environment, which means you can use them for tooling. So you could create tooling. I'll just do. Well, let's say we wanted to create a new one. We might say this tooling is called call it prep deploy, and then run in app server, and it's going to run the command. Actually, first it's going to cd into our app. Then it's going to run GitHub. I forget what the command actually is. Let's see. Here it is. Here, PR create. So GitHub PR create. And then that's pretty much all you need. So now in Lando, when you're running it, you type Lando prep deploy, and it will create a PR. And if you have your GitHub Actions set up to run your tests and then build your build artifact, that will just automatically happen since you created a PR using the GitHub CLI. There's a couple other additional steps you'll need to do to actually get that working. I do intend to have a GitHub CLI example on my examples repo, so follow along there to see that up there soon, because you'll have to authenticate and such, and there are ways to do that in Lando, and so I will be sure to demonstrate that and share it, but I don't have it in front of me right now. Yeah, so create the PR. That automatically kicks off all the CI stuff that does all the things that you need. So without ever leaving Lando, you just typed a command and you prepped your entire environment, tested it in the cloud, and got it ready to be deployed and done. Okay, so I believe that was the extent of what I have here. Let me get back to my slides. There they are. No, they are not. Okay, this one. Oh, there's another fun one. NETLIFY is another place you can deploy to. So if you've got a static HTML, so I mentioned building a build artifact for Drupal, but if you're here for my previous presentation before lunch, we talked about using tools like Tome to generate static HTML, or I have also used Gatsby to do the static HTML. This company calls NETLIFY will monitor your Git repository wherever it lives. And whenever you create a new branch, for example, you can have it run tests and such against that. But the big thing is, if you want to deploy like Tome, for example, it will create a version of your site for each Git branch, and it will basically, you can say, here's all the changes I made, put them in a new Git branch, create a new pull request, and now a whole new copy of your site exists on NETLIFY at a special URL that is specific to that that branch. So all of your changes are there, and then you have the option within NETLIFY to go live. I just wanted to kind of mention NETLIFY basically because it interacts with your Git repository. So anything simple, like if we set up the GitHub CLI tool, whenever you want to spin up a new copy of your site to work with, you just create a new Git branch. NETLIFY will pick up that you did that, create another environment for your site. This doesn't run Drupal, so it's something for more like if you're using something like Tome and you're generating static HTML, or Gatsby, similarly, you're generating static files. But you essentially take your build artifact, give it to NETLIFY, and they actually can run your build artifact if it's running JavaScripty stuff, but not so much with PHP and Drupal, unfortunately. But worth mentioning. And there's actually the Tome module for Git push. We'll push it up there. But yeah, actually the Tome module has a plugin for NETLIFY to where it will, from Tome or from Drush, it will kick off the deployment. So you can make your changes in Drupal on your local machine, build out the static files with Tome, and then with a single Drush command, publish it to NETLIFY's hosting. All right, here's some links. I will paste them into the chat once more. And that was my presentation. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to request to turn on your mic or post it in the chat, and I'd be happy to answer.